Thank you, Vicki. Good afternoon, everyone. I believe it's noon in Florida. It's still morning here in Arizona. And thank you for joining me today on this webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to thank TBLC for hosting and promoting this webinar. I very much appreciate their support and interest in this topic. And as Vicki mentioned, following the presentation, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have about today's session. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background. As Vicki mentioned, I'm currently head of acquisitions and metadata at Arizona State University. I've been serving in my current position for 3.5 years now. I currently represent a department of 25 employees with 7 staff and with 7 staff and librarians, a combination reporting directly to me. These teams represent a variety of responsibilities, skills, and expertise that span acquisitions, metadata operations, specialized resources, cataloging and processing, bibliographic and serials maintenance, and e-resource functions. Prior to ASU, I was supervisor for digital metadata and ingest at Northeastern University from 2012 to 2018. I've been working in academic libraries for nearly 17 years, and one of my positions, my very first, was at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I do have a background in cataloging and metadata, both in the traditional MARC RDA area, as well as with non-MARC standards such as Dublin Core and MODS, and in working on multiple digital and institutional repository projects. Since most change management resources focus on its application in the business world, I wanted to provide a resource that was more tailored to the library profession, particularly for technical services managers and staff. This presentation will introduce some easy to understand principles for initiating and implementing change, and also describe how these principles can be applied to 3 change scenarios or cases in library tech services. And these consist of a departmental reorganization, a rapid service transition, which I'll give you a clue, this happened about 2 years ago, and new workflows and project management. So to understand what change management is, it would first be helpful to define its meaning. So there are various definitions available, some emphasizing the technical aspects of bringing about change in an organization, while others focus on how it affects the people that are involved. I'd like to focus on one specific definition from the Association for Project Management, because it emphasizes both the individuals involved in the change, as well as the more structured or technical aspects of change. The APM defines change management as the overarching approach in an organization to move from the current to a future desirable state using a coordinated and structured approach in collaboration with stakeholders. Now that we've defined change management, I'd like to explore why we need change management. And the answer for this is simple. All organizations, including libraries and educational establishments, deal with change on a consistent basis. Furthermore, change isn't something that always comes easy. As individuals, we grow more comfortable with our routines and habits over time. Therefore, dealing with change can be difficult and puts pressure on individuals to change their routines and habits, sometimes over a very short period of time. As I noted, libraries are no strangers to change. Consider just a few factors that any library has to deal with when considering both external and internal change factors. One of the most important reasons that lead to change are the fluctuating, sometimes stagnating or even decreasing budgets that libraries are subject to. A stagnant or decreasing budget forces libraries to make difficult, sometimes painful decisions that affect both its resources and its people. A second critical factor are the changing needs of the library's users and their information-seeking habits. as print resources seem to be on a decline in many libraries, users are both requesting and relying much more on electronic and digitized resources. Users' changing needs and expectations have had an effect on the skills needed for staff to meet these expectations. So for example, skills such as physical processing and preservation remain important, but library staff are now expected to work comfortably in a digital environment and inquire and continue to enhance skills such as data assessment and analysis, batch metadata transformation, and management of e-resources. And this brings us to another change that libraries are familiar with, the impact of new technologies and the drive for more efficiency. Whether dealing with the migration and implementation of a new ILS system or the development of a new data repository, libraries and their staff have been expected to learn how to use these new technologies and utilize them efficiently. So I've introduced the basic broad level challenges that are transforming libraries and educational institutions. I wanted to look at the specific change factors in the area of library tech services. As you can see with the examples on this slide, there's ample pressure on library tech services departments to implement change on multiple fronts. This stems from the fact that tech services in many ways functions as the backbone of a library. And this is something I think that's very good to remind both administrators and our colleagues. Without tech services, libraries wouldn't be able to purchase or subscribe to resources to effectively balance our resource budgets or provide access to both physical and electronic resources that our users depend upon. So this list isn't exhaustive, but it illustrates the many and complex factors that contribute to constant change in our environment. As I mentioned earlier, libraries and especially tech services units are subject to changes in the areas of technology. Often, as is in the case with ASU, these technological changes occur in quick succession, creating multiple challenges, but also creating opportunities. So for example, the ASU library migrated from the III Innovative Interfaces Sierra ILS system to XLib versus ALMA in 2017. The change affected everyone in the department, including those working in metadata acquisitions, e-resources, and other areas. During the same time period, the library was required to implement and migrate to Workday, which was at the time the university's new financial management system. This change had an additional impact on the acquisitions and accounting staff, who were also dealing with the ALMA migration at about the same time. In addition to the ALMA and Workday implementations, the acquisition and metadata department also played an important role in the development of the library's new institutional repository. This change has been very critical for some of the department's catalogers who have added more responsibilities to their workloads in order to work with non-MARC repository metadata and spreadsheet workflows, and also understand linked data concepts. In addition to these large technological changes, we've experienced other smaller scale adjustments, such as the integration of our ALMA ILS with the OASIS web-based system for searching and ordering resources, as well as changes related to Primo, our discovery service that supports faceting and relevance ranking. Change management also involves the reconfiguration of existing workflows and the implementation of new workflows. One change that's recognizable to most libraries are the ongoing efforts to shift existing workflows that deal with print and physical to those that involved and digital materials. In cataloging and metadata units, these changes have been most significant in two areas: the management of non-MARC data for repositories and the complex workflows that have been developed to manage loading, processing, cleanup, and enrichment of e-resources metadata. So more specifically, the vendor records that many of you receive that of course have their individual problems. At ASU, we've recently dealt with additional workflow changes. One challenging initiative was our 2-year-long project, finally wrapped up, to integrate our financial management system Workday with our acquisitions functions in Alma. To resolve what we had an inefficient workflow configuration that required double payment in both systems. And this was very time consuming for our staff. We worked collaboratively and with the library's technology services staff and the university's financial services team to create an integrated solution that has efficiently changed our payment workflows and saved a lot of time for our staff. Other workflow reviews we've completed recently include a review of some of our more complex processes, such as our print withdrawals workflows, developing a more cohesive approach for tracking and analyzing e-resources usage data, and streamlining and simplifying our monographs processing workflows, which include tasks such as labeling and barcoding. So metadata standards. As I've mentioned, there's been a proliferation of digital and e-resources in libraries and collective efforts to manage, describe, and provide access to these resources. Since about the early 2000s or so, most institutions have changed or implemented new workflows in order to work with standards such as Dublin Core, MODS, EAD, VR Core, and many others. At the same time, library staff throughout the profession have been learning how to understand and work with technologies such as XML, XSLT, Python, and others in order to batch, edit, normalize, and transform metadata. Although many libraries have been successful in their efforts to implement standards such as Dublin Core and technologies like XML or RDF, we're now looking at additional changes in the future. These included the adoption of BibFrame as a MARC replacement and linked data technologies that promise to increase search and retrieval. Besides metadata concerns, libraries such as ASU have been implementing other standards as well. In the last few years, the ASU library has expanded efforts to collect, analyze, and interpret our e-resources usage data. And this initiative required our former e-resources manager and staff to learn how to work with usage standards such as Counter and Sushi. Another factor that spurs change in libraries is organizational adjustment. So this factor can take a lot of forms, but the most common is usually related to reorganization or realignment that affects both the library and its individual departments, and in some cases, the larger parent organization. The reasons for a departmental reorg, such as in tech services, can stem from a number of factors. Some have already been addressed in our presentation today. For instance, changing workflows and processes, as well as new services. Additionally, a reorg may be needed to address staff retirements or staff shortages. And a broader reason for a department reorg might stem from a organizational charter or a set of goals and strategic priorities. And such strategic priorities may require several years of planning, goal setting, and implementation. And likewise, these priorities are often dependent on one another. So therefore, the implementation of these goals in one department or area can have a critical impact on priorities in another department and vice versa. Staffing changes. Adjustments in staffing fit into the broader category of organizational adjustment, but I'd like to examine this factor a bit more closely since staffing changes are not always the result of a broader organizational adjustment. Many libraries tend to retain staff for long periods of time. However, the pandemic has led to some large-scale resignations at many resignations and retirements at many institutions, including my own. Professionals are seeking new opportunities and are leaving the profession altogether. And this trend is resulting in gaps of knowledge, expertise, and unfortunately, in some cases, specific services. Regardless of whether staff are leaving due to retirements, career advancement, career changes, staff departures often lead to a reassessment of those skills and experience in libraries. And naturally, this reassessment can drive change within tech services. A strategic new hire can also be utilized as a means to what I call an effort to spark change and initiative. So I've participated in many library interviews during my 17 years in the profession. And one of the things I always end up hearing during the interview is something along the lines of, we'd like to offer this position to an individual who will bring fresh ideas and perspectives to the library and tech services, and we'd like this individual to provide leadership and initiative. So these key sorts of positions can be department head positions, but also staff managers or non-managerial positions who serve an important role in implementing broader initiatives such as digital collections, e-resources, and metadata. Another factor that's driving change is related to budgets, including expenses, costs, and savings measures. According to Library Journal's Lisa Peet, from her Library Journal's 2022 Budgets and Funding Survey, found that in 2021, out of the 214 library survey respondents, there was an average increase of 3% in operating budgets, an increase of 4% in personnel budgets, and a materials budget rise of 1.3%. The study also found that 70% of libraries participating in the survey reported an increase, while about 25% experienced a budget decrease. Pete also reported, but for those that have seen just substantial cuts or need to fund capital needs, digging out will involve a concerted effort that goes beyond federal stabilization funding. In our case, our budget has remained flat. We've worked hard to increase services, but this has been very challenging, and the verdict of how this will pan out for my institution, I think, remains to be seen. We've seen library staff depart in large numbers here during 2021 and the first quarter of 2022. Many positions remain unfilled due to a competitive job market and the really skyrocketing cost of living increases in the Phoenix area. If we're not able to fill our vacant positions in the near future and create much needed new positions that rely on funding, some critical responsibilities, such as acquisition of and creating access to materials, may need to be re-examined, and staff roles may need to be adjusted. I'd like to examine some specific strategies for managing and implementing change. These change management strategies are not specific to libraries or tech services functions. In fact, they're probably more commonly utilized or more well-known in business and industry. But I think it's good to get an overview of the different approaches that are available, whether you decide to utilize one of these models or the recognized methods, or implement a combination of change management strategies, or develop your own plan, will probably depend on a combination of organizational needs and your philosophy towards dealing with change and factors such as leadership and communication. A simple internet search will reveal dozens of change management strategies. I'd like to highlight several kinds this afternoon. There is a link in the credits slide at the end of this presentation. So if you want to find out more about these, you can access those links and find out more specific information. I'll just be briefly going over these. The first is Lewin's change management model, which consists of three easy to remember steps. The first is to unfreeze, which consists of determining what needs to change and ensuring that senior management supports the change. The second step is change itself, which consists of communication, empowerment, and involvement. And the last step being refreeze, which consists of commitment to change, sustaining it, and providing support and training. Another well-known change model is the Kubler-Ross 5-stage model. This one's really interesting in that it's based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a psychiatrist, her original 5 stages of grief, published in her 1969 book on death and dying. In the first stage, denial, this first stage makes it difficult for staff and team members to accept change. And a number of challenges such as low morale and decreased productivity might take place. In stage 2, anger, team members might react angrily or feel a sense of fear and uncertainty about the future. At stage 3, bargaining, employees start to consider how they can delay the inevitable change or test the boundaries for offering alternatives that might seem more comfortable or less challenging. In the 4th stage, depression, team members start to realize change is inevitable, but unfortunately morale and productivity take another dip. And in the 5th and last stage, acceptance sums up the eventual embrace of the change. There's also the ProSci ADKAR model designed by Jeff Hyatt. ADKAR is an acronym which represents the 5 themes in Hyatt's model. The first, awareness of the need for change. Step 2 being the desire to participate and support in the change. In the third stage, participants gain knowledge of what to do during and after the change. In the 4th, they gain the ability to realize or implement change as required. And in the 5th, there is reinforcement to ensure the results continue. Besides these 3 more formal, well-known change models, there are other models that organizations have developed and recommend for change. Some of these utilize a combination of published models, then adapt or revise the stages. For instance, the UK's NCVO know-how recommends the following strategy for initiating successful change on its site. These consist of acknowledging and understanding the change, communicating the need and involving people in developing change, the step number 3 of developing change plans, the 4th step of implementing change plans, and lastly, evaluating the team's progress and a celebration of its success. Wikipedia offers even a simpler outline in its article on change management, identifying only 4 stages: determining the need for change, preparing and planning for change, implementing, and sustaining. Each of these change models offer a different philosophy and perspective on introducing and implementing change. I found it useful to combine concepts from several of these models, particularly ADKAR, NCV know-how, and the change management foundation model. I particularly like the latter model's use of action verbs to describe stages of change, but also appreciate the other 2 models' attention to communication and participation. In consideration of all of these models and their strengths, I like to suggest applying and working with a hybrid or combination model that consists of 5 simple stages: assessing, formulating, communicating, enacting, and maintaining. By managing change using easy to understand principles such as these, the concept of change can be associated with positive attributes such as activity, enthusiasm, and participation rather than potential negative attributes. What I'd like to do next is demonstrate how these concepts can be utilized to effectively manage and coordinate change in a collaborative team environment. I'll be examining 3 change scenarios that are based on my recent experiences. The first I brought up, the first is a departmental reorg that took place in late 2019 and that I managed in collaboration with my supervisor and associate university, one of our associate university librarians. This was my first departmental reorg, and this was probably one of the most difficult projects that I've had responsibility. I say this because I was aware that a reorg affects everyone in a specific team or department. I was going through sort of the images in my head of all the people involved and all the people on my staff and how they might be impacted. My aim was to develop a framework that not only met the needs of administration and the library, but also meets the needs of my staff. And I viewed this as a team effort where everyone will be involved and engaged in the reorg. Using the 5 simple steps I introduced in the previous slide, using my experience, I'll begin with assessing the need for change. So when I first arrived at ASU, I was aware that one of the first things I'd work on was a departmental reorg. During my first few weeks in the position, I met with my direct reports as well as other staff in the department. The department at the time was about the same size as it is now. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. It is less because we have had some departures. But the department functioned as 2 departments in one being acquisitions and analysis, and the other being cataloging. This is an org chart, and apologies, I know that it's not the most attractive looking org chart, but I try to do the best here, and the existing org chart that we had on site wasn't as, I guess, clear. The department had 25 staff at the time. As you can see here, 2 managers, with cataloging having 14 staff and acquisitions having 11, and they're structured differently also. Of the 14 cataloging staff, the primary responsibilities for 13 were copy and original metadata work, while 1 staff was responsible for processing. Of the 11 acquisition staff, only 4 were responsible for ordering and receiving. 1 was a full-time accountant, 4 were working in serials maintenance, 1 was responsible for e-resources management, and 1 worked in the area of data collection and analysis. Within the first few weeks of my role, I realized the amount of strain on our our core acquisitions team. Again, only 4 staff out of a larger team of 12 were actually responsible for ordering and receiving. Although both cataloging and acquisitions were very busy at the time with a lot of projects and tasks, I realized through my assessment that I needed to create more support for the core acquisitions team. And one of my goals was to initiate cross-training responsibilities within the department, specifically to assign ordering and receiving responsibilities to other department staff, including copy catalogers, who are well positioned to take on that work. My other assignments included a decision to develop 5 teams from the existing 2. This was based on what I and my supervisor thought were critical priorities that aligned with the library's long-term goals. And I knew that we needed to put more emphasis on e-resources as well as more emphasis on cataloging and accessibility of both print and digital special collections materials. In the case of the reorg, the simplest way to illustrate the formulation of change was the new departmental org chart that I created. New at the time. And this new departmental organization was based on the factors that I discussed during the assessment stage. As you can see, at the time, this was the proposed and new organizational structure for the acquisitions and metadata department that fulfills most of the objectives that I established during the assessment. The 2 larger teams have now been transformed into 5 smaller ones, each with a team manager. These new teams consisting of specialized resources and description, cataloging operations and services, acquisition and accounting, bibliographic and serials maintenance, and e-resources. With this new structure in place, I put forth a proposal for the department to place greater emphasis on our growing collection of e-resources and also related maintenance issues, the growing need for accessing print and digital special collections, as well as a team that continues to provide specialized support for serials, but now it also includes staff catalogers whose responsibilities also include overall bibliographic maintenance. In addition to the new structure, Cross-training and the concept of shared responsibilities was emphasized. And regardless of which team the catalogers reported to, they would still meet as a working group led by the principal cataloger and team lead for cataloging operations to discuss projects, shared tasks, and emerging metadata developments. Additionally, some cataloging staff were assigned with responsibilities to cross-train in areas such as ordering and receiving. After formulation, I moved on to communication. And prior to sharing this reorg plan with my staff, the first step was for me to discuss the proposal with my supervisor and integrate her suggestions. The proposal was also reviewed and approved by the director and university librarian, the library's operations and HR director. She in turn shared the proposal with university HR in order to ensure that the proposal did not conflict with any existing staff contracts or agreements or other potential issues. After making some minor changes to the new reorg structure, I then shared the reorg plan with my staff. However, I needed to plan my communication strategy carefully in order to ensure that it would be implemented effectively. So I created an outline supplemented by a timeline that included specific dates and the individuals involved. At this point, the act of communicating change begins to overlap and transform into the next step of enacting change. So at the time, I scheduled meetings with my 5 new team managers, sharing the new org chart with them, defining the departmental goals, as well as discussing and establishing the new goals for each manager and their team. The first 5 initial meetings went very well. At this point, the new managers were aware of the plan, but this information was not yet shared with the staff. Shortly thereafter, though, I scheduled 5 discussion sessions with each team in order to discuss the goals and expectations for each team, highlight and communicate the need for this reorg, and then answer and address any concerns or questions that the staff had. I decided that 5 individual discussion sessions with each team would be a lot more effective than a single sort of presentation for the entire department. I felt the latter approach, a single sort of introductory presentation for everyone, might be interpreted as, oh, management wants a reorg, we don't have a choice. This might get difficult or complicated, or it's just change for change's sake. I really wanted to avoid that, and I feel I largely did because I had the opportunity to coordinate the small team discussions and address any individual concerns and anxieties. After communicating and discussing the plan with my staff, the initial implementation took some time to pan out. Although the new managers were in place and staff were reassigned to the 5 new teams, my goal was to not micromanage or rush the transition. My goal was to see the reorg develop organically over time, with each staff member becoming comfortable with the changes. And lastly, the stage of maintaining this change. About 1 year after the initial reorg, in late 2020, early 2021, the department had participated in a number of successful transitions. And the new special collections team had engaged in several projects that were delayed or minimized prior to the reorg, including the development of a metadata application profile and migration plan for ASU's new repository, as well as a plan for providing original cataloging for some of our rare books, which had been in backlog for many years. Additionally, we sustained change by reviewing workflows, including an initiative to streamline our print withdrawals and monographic processing tasks. Likewise, we've been able to place a greater emphasis on data, and this effort has been helpful in identifying and targeting subscription cancellations, which has provided some budget savings to us. Additionally, we sustained change by persevering in our 2-year-long effort to integrate ALMA payment functions with the university's financial management system, saving our staff a lot of time. Another case for implementing the 5 stages of change, the hybrid model that I talked about earlier, can be applied to what I'm going to describe as rapid service transition. Prior to 2020, I had not experienced a work disruption quite like COVID-19. It was challenging because it drastically altered work norms, our processes, our workflows, and the types of services that we provide. At the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, ASU and administrators considered various strategies for continuing operations. Several options were considered, but as cases began to rise in March 2020, the university announced most operations would transition to remote work with an emphasis on digital learning. After the announcement was made, library administration started to work with department heads and managers to start the transition. At the time, I was skeptical that a transition all remote could work because of the library's identity as a physical meeting space or a tangible learning environment. However, over time, I was confident and became more confident that my department could handle such an event. It had been 5 months since the departmental reorg, and I was really impressed by my managers and staff's abilities to embrace change and was confident we could do it again, except just this time a lot faster. The assessment period was short. It was a few days, in fact. I remember that sort of middle week in March where we were all sort of scrambling. We were all aware that we needed to transition quickly. Tech services needed to switch to remote operations right away, but also be successful in providing services that aligned with the university's mission to provide digital and remote learning experiences. The first task was to suspend physical operations. This meant ordering and receipt of print and non-print physical materials was put on hold. Additionally, most cataloging of incoming physical materials was suspended. However, at the time, there were print and other physical materials en route to the building, and we had to make plans to either physically receive some of these en route materials within a reasonable time frame or reroute the materials to a central storage and holding facility. An assessment of the problem also revealed that most, but not all staff were prepared to perform their jobs from home using laptops, local internet connections, and Zoom software. For those who lacked access to a laptop, arrangements were made to distribute and lend laptops. Additionally, many staff were using VPN and remote desktop access for the first time, and arrangements were made to facilitate these operations. I'll say if there's one thing I regret, it's that I was somewhat caught off guard by the amount of tech preparation involved for the rapid transition. It's a lesson learned that I think I'll be ready for next time, but hopefully that next time will not be another pandemic. After assessing what was needed and knowing that print operations were suspended for an indefinite period, I worked with my managers to formulate a plan that focused on remote operations and services. With acquisitions, the focus was naturally turned to e-resources. Additionally, with other libraries experiencing similar situations, vendors began offering new and extended trials. My former e-resources manager and her team were well prepared to provide access to these new resources and trials, and our efforts here were appreciated. The rapid transition also provided an opportunity to expand our metadata efforts into repository initiatives. As I indicated earlier, one of the goals of our recent reorg was a greater focus on access to digital and repository materials. And now we had a very ideal opportunity to do so. Additionally, the department had a backlog of MARC metadata enhancement and cleanup tasks, and this transition facilitated their efforts in making progress towards reducing that backlog. In terms of communication, I met with all the managers immediately and frequently after the announcement. And again, I wish I had a bit more foresight and prep, but I owe it to my managers for being able to grasp the urgent situation and their collaborative attitudes. During the first 2 weeks, I was in frequent contact with my managers and felt this good communication set the stage for a successful transition. The enacting phase was largely an implementation of the goals that my managers and I had discussed and agreed to. As indicated earlier, our e-resources manager at the time and her team worked to provide and maintain access to new e-resources and trials. In terms of our transition to repository projects, I had discussions with my specialized resources manager, and he successfully and quickly trained 3 cataloging staff in spreadsheet workflows and working with both MARC and non-MARC metadata workflows. Many of the remaining cataloging staff turned their attention to a large backlog of maintenance projects. And my cataloging services manager facilitated several large projects associated with our 2018 migration from Sierra to Alma that could now be attended to because we had the time. As for acquisition staff, because of the suspension of print, they were able to focus on E, provide much needed training to library staff on OASIS ordering procedures, and turn their attention to upcoming fiscal close, which despite all of our worries, turned out to be successful. As for maintaining these changes, ASU did ultimately resume print operations in late 2020, and the majority of staff are now working on site, although we've managed to reduce office capacity due to departures during 2021 and early 2022. Staff continued to work on remote and digital projects, although we've temporarily cut back again due to, as I've mentioned before, some staff departures and metadata in resources. In my last example, I wanted to demonstrate how a multi-stage change model could be utilized to facilitate changes in workflows and introduce project management concepts. So throughout my career, I've specialized in analyzing specific workflows and processes, specifically in relation to repository metadata creation and its remediation. In my past and current roles here at ASU, at Northeastern, also very much so at the University of South Florida, I've been responsible for assessing the quality and accuracy of digital collections metadata, and then facilitating the transformation and enhancement of that metadata prior to, during, and after repository migrations. As a manager, I'm aware of the fact that to initiate change in cataloging workflows and processes, I've needed to take a complete inventory of all the problems and consider the methods to correct or minimize these problems. Communicate my ideas to others involved in the task or project, and then act to implement these goals and concepts. So during the initial assessment, what I would usually do is record my observations regarding the metadata quality in terms of projects where I was doing remediation or cleanup, and determined that many repository resources were either insufficiently described or even inaccessible. And since this isn't a metadata workflows presentation, I won't go into a lot of detail about these sorts of problems, but many of you are probably aware of them. They can include inaccurate or incomplete titles, absence of important subject headings, inaccurate or unclear dates, or simply a lack of consistency in regards to bibliographic description or general metadata standards. Overall, the legacy repository metadata required significant cleanup and or enhancement, and the necessary work needed a plan. So for the formulation in my previous cases, what I did is I developed a project plan with goals for developing a consistent workflow for metadata cleanup and enrichment that addressed a number of objectives. And these project plan objectives consist of, first, defining the goal of your project. This can be a simple action-oriented statement. Second, determining your project or scope. How much do you wish to accomplish? What can you reasonably accomplish considering the time and resources that you have? Third, determining the staffing needs for the project. Here, you should also consider each participant's skills and experience and whether additional training is needed. Additionally, you have to consider your existing commitments and the other projects that are active in the department, and think about which staff can make more time and which, of course, obviously do not have the time. Fourth, identifying the individual cataloging enhancement and cleanup tasks that will be needed in order to successfully reach your goals. Fifth, defining both the team's overall responsibilities and then each individual's responsibilities. These, of course, should be negotiated with those members. And lastly, developing and establishing a project timeline, which should include milestones and an estimated review and completion dates. And the thing about milestones and completion dates is they should be estimates because, of course, as we know, things can be unpredictable. Staff have many other projects going on at the same time. So of course, milestones and estimated completion dates. I don't usually like deadlines because I've often found out that, or I should say a very exact deadline. Exact deadlines are usually hard to adhere to simply because of the fact that so much of my staff are so busy with so many different projects and commitments. As for the communication stage, this is an opportunity to reach out to staff, explain the overall project and why it's needed. In this case, correcting cataloging and metadata quality issues. In past experiences, I've found it useful to schedule an initial meeting where I clearly define the project goal and scope, as well as the tasks and the responsibilities outlined. Additionally, I'd recommend being prepared to negotiate with the team members in case there are unexpected obstacles, as I mentioned, that could delay timelines. And lastly, of course, clarifying the timeline and milestones and being flexible. In the enactment phase of the situation primarily is implementing the project plan and its stated goals. However, besides implementing, I recommend supporting and providing training that may be needed to fulfill the objectives. So for instance, your metadata project may require that staff work with XML or RDF. Your current staff may not have these skills, or they may need to brush up these skills. So in order to make the project more efficient, you may need to provide or obtain training also for scripting tools, such as regular expressions or Python. Likewise, you might need to obtain and purchase licenses for software utilities, such as XML editors, if you're not using these. During the duration of the project, I also aim to be as available as much as possible so I can answer questions, address concerns, and provide constructive feedback. And lastly, the best way to maintain momentum when introducing projects and new workflows is to continue to provide support to your team members, particularly in the areas of continued training and skills building. In addition to your feedback, I recommend asking staff and team members for their comments, their feedback. I found staff suggestions to be extremely helpful to know what they're thinking and what they're going through. And I frequently use that staff feedback to adjust project plans and overall project goals. I wanted to close by saying that no matter what type of change you're facing in your organization, be sure to take note of you and your team's successes. Positive reinforcement works on all levels, whether you're a higher level administrator or a staff contributor. I can't state enough how important that positive reinforcement is, and perhaps sending a shout out and congratulating or mentioning how appreciative you are of the work that the staff have been doing and contributing to this change. Additionally, I would suggest be sure to make note and record the challenges and any mistakes that were made along the way. We all learn from experience, and adapting to change can be both challenging and very rewarding. And lastly, change shouldn't be static once you've achieved your goals. I would recommend you continuing to adapt and improve. Otherwise, if we don't do that, then change basically loses its meaning. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening today, and I hope it was informative, and I'd be happy to address any questions you have. Hi, Vicky. Unfortunately, I'm not hearing Vicky.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi.
Hi. I don't think anybody has any questions. You must have covered everything.
Oh, I doubt that, but thank you. Would it be possible to get this presentation? I did send out the PDF of the slides. Vicky, would we be able to pass those out?
Yes, they'll be sent out this afternoon when we get the recording uploaded.
Great. I'm sorry I didn't send those out earlier. I was still working on some of the slides yesterday evening. I see some comments. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the comments. Thank you. I'm sure many of you have experienced some of the same things, especially, of course, 2 years ago with early 2020. That was stressful and a bit of a shock there, especially that March period.
Daniel, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
All right.